My name is Cynthia Bullock, and I'm the Deputy Director of the UK Research and Innovation's Healthy Ageing Challenge. As my title suggests, I've been living the dream that is challenge-led innovation for the past 4 to 5 years. And as the ask is to consider the future direction of challenge-led innovation, I reasoned that I had a unique perspective worth sharing with the audience. Just to set some external context, over the course of our delivery to date, we have had 4 different prime ministers and 7 different secretaries of state. This matters because UKRI, the organisation I'm from, is a non-departmental public body previously sponsored by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, but most recently the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. So what did we set out to do back in 2019? Well, I should start by saying that our challenge-led model does stay true to the standard definition, which refers to an approach used to deliver innovative solutions to specific societal and/or public sector challenges where a solution doesn't already exist. Our challenge recognized or sought to recognize the global challenge and opportunity that is an aging society. The big concept is that we're all living longer, good news, but not necessarily all enjoying the full benefits of those extra years. So the vision was to build on the strong UK research base to help transform existing industries or catalyze new ones. Industry leadership we felt was needed, but delivered through multidisciplinary teams with a real focus on growth, productivity, but also societal benefit and impact, being clear of the additionality from government intervention. Success for us meant increases across a number of areas, summed up in R&D investment, including inward investment from overseas, and multidisciplinary and multi-sectorial collaborations. Our budget was £98 million, with a vision to enable businesses, including social enterprises, led by research, to develop and deliver services and products which support people to remain active, productive, independent, and socially connected across generations for as long as possible. Our innovation framework, illustrated there, was underpinned by research evidence to ensure that we were addressing the specific themes that together contributed towards aging well and addressing the market failures we'd identified in the system. This slide is really good because it gives you a really good overview of all the different interventions we deployed to try to unlock some of those opportunities. They included everything from early stage research funding through to large scaling programs of work, academic research, investor partnerships, and funding for social ventures. So I think for me, this highlighted the point that Elvira was making earlier on, the idea of a mix of policy rationales, a mix of policy domains, and a mix of policy instruments. So just some quick run-through of our successes to date. So to date, we have about 180 projects, £46 million of co-investment from industry. We have engaged with 31 universities across the UK, and for me, more importantly, 80% of the innovative projects that we've funded are inclusive of lower income groups. So the benefits will be felt across the whole groups, populations within the UK. And this slide is just to show you that one of the things that we were really excited about was that a lot of the projects that we were funding, the majority of those solutions were quite near to market. So in our minds, they were likely to be delivering impact sooner rather than later. And this also shows you the breadth of partners that we've been able to work with. Clearly, the majority of them are micro and small, but we have been able to engage with large as well as medium enterprises. The last two slides I'll show you is just to highlight that we feel and believe, and we've got the evidence to prove it, that we are playing our part in supporting growth and addressing health inequalities across the whole of the UK. So for me, the future of challenge-led innovation is and should be positive, as there are compelling evidence of its value to the economy and society if deployed effectively. But I should add a caveat by admitting that challenge-led models do struggle with rapid changes in government. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cynthia. Kel, do you want to introduce yourself and lead us off?
Can everybody hear me okay? Is that on? Yeah, carrying my voice well enough. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kellie Beirne, and I head up the Cardiff capital region. I'll just take a few minutes just to explain that and give it some context. So the Cardiff capital region is a collaboration of 10 local authorities in South East Wales, working across 2 layers of government. So we work with UK government and Welsh government, and that probably sounds like a challenge in itself, doesn't it? 3 layers of government, that triumvirate approach. I think that the really important thing about the Cardiff capital region is it's home to about 1.5 million people, so it's got a very dense population, but it's also responsible for about 52% of all Welsh economic output, which is significant because there's large concentrations of industry and businesses, particularly SMEs here in the region. And what we're doing at the moment, I guess, falls into 2 main camps. On the first hand, we came together initially as 10 local authorities supported by the 2 tiers of government because we had a city deal, a £1.3 billion city deal. But over the last couple of years, we've started to morph into being a corporate entity, our own legal corporate entity, much more like you see in England with combined authorities. So many more powers, freedoms, flexibilities around things like regional transport planning, regional land use planning, corporate duties that really set us apart in taking forward a single agenda around regional public investment. I think the point that I want to make that relates back to the purpose of this session, though, is Cardiff Capital Region is a really diverse space. You've got some of the most prosperous communities, cheek by jowl, with some of the least prosperous communities in the whole of Northern Europe. So our job of work can't just be about this thing called the economy. So we've got a city deal that comes with targets. Yeah, you always get targets in a UK government setting. So we've got to try and achieve 25,000 jobs, 4 billion in private leverage, and we've got to try and increase GVA by about 5%. But the contention is, and the contention of our political leaders, is you could hit every single one of those targets and fundamentally miss the point. So this thing called economic growth that we've been set up to do has got to be the means. It can't just be the end in itself, because we've got loads of different issues and problems. You know, as I say, and you know, you can imagine some of the issues in terms of, you know, endemic child poverty, you know, chronic health conditions. So what we've got to try and do in the Cardiff capital region is take a more distributed approach to what we're trying to do. It can't just be about the economy, it's got to be about tackling some of the social issues. Because I think the pandemic, You know, the war in Ukraine, huge issues now with energy security, cost of living crisis. All of these things remind us that this thing called, you know, economic development can't just be about growth in isolation. It's got to be about the way in which we respond to and anticipate a whole range of societal issues and problems. So what we're trying to do in the Cardiff capital region, I guess, is a little different. You know, we're not going to be here to be target driven and held to account by things that, you know, are they really meaningful? What we're trying to do, I guess, is create fundamentally better conditions, and this will take a long time. It can't just be about economic growth in isolation. It has to be about impact on the communities that, as public servants, we are very privileged to serve. So one of the things that we've been doing for a couple of years now is running a challenge fund, and we've partnered up with our 10 local authorities who've also helped us invest in a programme called Infuse, Innovative Future Services, which is about building capacity and capability in vocational 21st century public servants. And the job of work is effectively, can we build that capability for innovation in and around public services, and can we then apply them to, you know, some of the big challenges of the day, not just, you know, economic and industrial challenges, but societal ones are really important because that enables us to pinpoint the growth opportunities for the future. I think, you know, it's fair to say that I think we've done some really good work. You know, we've explored a lot of ground in the last couple of years. It's never as easy as you think it's going to be, is it? You always find out things along the way that sort of stop you in your tracks, because those things in themselves require attention and focus and capacity building. But I think it's fair to say that the way that we've worked to date, and this is probably a critique of myself, is that, you know, the projects that we've really worked on with partners have tended to be sort of, you know, single track, single focus projects. I guess that's the nature of trying to work across such a big and diverse space. So I think that's starting to change. We're seeing a lot more collaboration now on projects like food security and resilience. But I think, you know, our experience to date, you know, we've set up a challenge fund. It's around local wealth building, because we're interested in not just the tradable economy, we're really interested in the foundational economy, public service ingenuity. I think what we found is you can't just set up a challenge fund, put £10 million on it and expect people to rock up and deliver great things. Because it sounds marvellous, doesn't it? But sometimes being funding-led is a bit like being target-led. You get perverse outcomes. So I think, you know, what we're trying to do is to evolve our approach from being just about a challenge fund that sits within a city deal to thinking how we can make this whole approach around mission-oriented thinking much more central to everything that we want to do and everything that we want to become. And I think that the reason why we like and are attracted to missions is because it it gives a very, very different frame for some of our ambitions. It's about breadth, it is about depth, but I think it's about the strategic mandate to really hardwire this focus on social and societal issues into our approach. And I think that is important because, and I know Mariana Mazzucato always says this, but the thing about innovation is it has a rate, but it also has a direction. And in public services, and I'm sure we're all guilty of this, it's probably a very open admission, but sometimes we fund projects and programs and they're fantastic, and then we think, oh yeah, let's do this checkbox EDI, ESG thing at the end, and a Wellbeing of Future Generations assessment. We too infrequently think about how we embed these things in the proposition and the challenge up front. And I think that's what we've got the opportunity to do now, influence the direction of innovation, think about how we make it more sustainable, equitable, distributed, which in our region, given, you know, the differentials that we have in terms of quality of life, is really, really important. So missions for me, I think, are much more than just a single program focus, because they create more absorptive capacity at the nexus of public, private, higher education than just the challenge approach I think has given us. It's much more about cross sectors. But I think really importantly, and again, I'm going to probably get on my soapbox about this, in my job where the public sector is trying to be interventionist, is trying to be a co-investor, You know, we still get people who think, oh, they're just there to de-risk things. They're just there to enable, you know. But we are here to take risk for reward with a high share of responsibility. And we should be able to share in some of this growth and the opportunity that we are creating. So I think, you know, this thing about being market shapers, market creators, stimulating those new ways of doing things on an investment basis is really important. So just a couple of things that I wanted to say. That I think, you know, that this focus on missions for me is a real opportunity to build a whole region approach to regional public investment. As I said, we are becoming a corporate entity, so this can be key, you know, to our identity, our personality as we grow and evolve. And I think, you know, making sure we create those conditions, culture, structure, systems, processes, is a huge opportunity. So, yeah, I think for me, you know, it's much more about the social, the cultural, the ecological aspects of what we're going to be doing as much as the economic ones. And I think that's really important. And we are here as the Cardiff Capital Region, based in this building, Spark, because we're really interested in the social science dimensions of what we're trying to do, the behavioural side of things. I think innovation for too long has been hijacked by the pure scientists. You know, tech, I see it every day in my day job. Oh, you know, innovation must mean big business, big tech. You know, it's just as critical to the way that we develop as the public sector. It's just as critical to a care worker or, you know, the future of sort of, you know, what you've just been talking about, Cynthia, around sort of an aging population, the future of mobility, data, and all of those other things. So, yes, what we're doing. So 3 key things I just wanted to mention quickly. In the Cardiff Capital Region, we've been all things to all people for the last 25 years around the South East Wales economy. We're trying to focus on the things that we believe we are uniquely placed to do. One of those is about developing our research and development intensity around key economic and industrial clusters. We've got some key strengths. We're not trying to win the same race as everyone else. Everyone says we're brilliant at life sciences. We're not. We're just really good at medical devices and diagnostics. Everyone says we're brilliant at advanced manufacturing. We're not, but we're really good at compound semiconductors. So we've tried to be really granular and focused on the things that we could stand to have real comparative advantage around. And we funded some of these things as cluster trade bodies. We've been lucky to receive funding from UK Research and Innovation, which we've been cornerstone investors in. And all these things we set up, Cyber Innovation Hub, FinTech Wales, the work we've done with CS Connected for compound semiconductors, they all have challenge funds. Maybe they don't call them challenge funds, but they are a way of capturing value around problem solving. So we have a huge agenda to tie up what we've been doing in terms of public sector challenge funds with a mission approach in terms of some of our key industrial sectors, because they've all got a public purpose mission. Yes, they're there for profit, but the work they're doing in medtech, in compound semiconductors, this is life-saving stuff. It has that societal virtue to it. And I think where we haven't quite cracked it yet is I think we're really good at seeing our clusters in silos, in neat buckets. The mission thing gives us the chance to float above the top and think about the interfaces around open innovation, which I think is a huge area of development opportunity. We just acquired a former coal-fired power station, nearly 500 acres. And again, you know, that's been a difficult, complex, risky process. But what we're trying to do there is to repurpose that for our own domestic energy capability. We'll try some things out there that won't work at all, but we'll try some things that will. That is a mission for us. We shouldn't just be approaching that in a business as usual sense. I think, you know, the second thing that we're trying to do in the Cardiff Capital Region, which is compatible with a missions focus, is building that ecosystem approach. So for the past 5 years, what we've done is really, really boring, because I've read, you know, biannual science innovation surveys. You know, I've looked at our science innovation audits. And what it said, it's always said this, the Cardiff Capital Region has innovation strengths, but we successively fail to convert those to innovation outcomes because we don't have the stickiness, we don't have that ecosystem of conditions in place. So what we've been trying to do is focus on our clusters, build capacity in public service innovation, build capacity in terms of skills and capabilities, set up an innovation investment fund based on providing long-term risk capital, set up a fund to help with things like strategic premises. So we've just been focused on trying to build those key ingredients. And again, I think, this can't be about supply-side policies in isolation. It's got to be about some of those demand-led triggers, which is where I think the mission-driven approach comes in. And then lastly, the third reason why I think we are ripe to try out big thinking, mission thinking, is because the Cardiff capital region isn't going anywhere. Yes, our city deal was 15 to 20 years, but what we've tried to do in setting up as a new corporate entity and engendering some of these bigger corporate responsibilities for the region is whenever we've invested, we invest on an evergreen basis. We try not to give grants. When we've bought the compound semiconductor foundry, when we've invested in local companies, we do debt or equity. And okay, there's a risk involved with that, and there'll be a failure rate, no doubt. Yeah, and I'll have to take that thrashing when it comes. I'm already prepared for it. But the point is, if we can show that as the public sector, through making something happen, we can take a share of that, and we can recycle that into a fund, which always enables us to be a cornerstone investor, building upon what we're doing, enabling more of the same, then we've got a greater chance of success and financial sustainability as well. So I think for us, showing that we can work in this multi-tiered governance environment, but we can show that, the public sector being a co-investor is very much about a positive sum game, I think is very compatible with where we want to take the mission agenda. So yeah, I do believe, for us, there's a lot more that we need to do around this. I think we've only just started to really understand the opportunity. There's a long way to go. I think one of the areas that we really need to develop quite urgently is a totally different set of measures for really understanding the impact of challenge and mission-driven orientation. All we've got at the moment are those things I said at the outset: GVA, jobs, growth. It's a gamified system. It doesn't tell the story about creating capability for innovation. So more reflexive measurement, I think, relating to whole systems change is definitely what we've got to introduce here. So my friend Charles Ledbetter always says, movements with missions make markets. Missions with movements with missions make markets. And I think that's definitely the opportunity that we have to focus on here. So thank you very much for listening to me, and happy to take part in the discussion, Rick.
Great. Thanks very much, Kel. Sounds like you've got your hands full. I'm sure there are some questions from the audience. I'm going to take one that we had written down first, because it gives us the chance to bridge between the two presentations a little, if that's okay. So Cynthia, at one point quite early on in the presentation, made the point that the challenge initiative that she's describing, I think she said, sort of builds from the sort of pure definition of addressing societal challenges, and that was clear from the presentation you gave. The question we have in that context is a challenge approach best suited to public sector service delivery or societal challenges, and how can it be leveraged to deliver on the economic value that Kellie began to expand? So maybe, Cynthia, first you could tell us a little bit more about how your initiative is bringing business in as a driver for innovation and change, and how economic value gets captured along with the social value that you described.
Yeah, no, so I should mention that across UKRI, there are many more challenges. So healthy aging is one of many. I can't remember the exact amount, but we've run like different, I think we're on wave 3 at the moment, and there's about 23 each time across all of those waves. And some of them absolutely lend themselves better to the idea of societal challenges, and others are clearly where there is an established industry network, lend themselves better to the sort of economic. But the point I think Kellie was making about how you design your evaluation such that it's not only capturing the quantitative elements, but it's really looking at that narrative, that sort of the hearts and mind piece, the qualitative stuff. I know that sometimes we've poo-pooed case studies, but actually it can be used in quite a unique way to demonstrate the impact that you are having, particularly where that impact is transforming people's lives, right? So some of the things that we're trying to do within the Healthy Aging Challenge is to demonstrate that it is possible to empower people and give them the right tools to live the kind of lives that they want to lead. And that's not going to be captured in GVA. They don't care about how many jobs we've created within B&Q. They don't care about how many investors we've particularly brought in. But for us, we feel that it's the means to an end, which is to catalyze and drive these solutions to market as quickly as possible. And you kind of get a win-win out of both. So you get the societal benefit, but you're also able to leverage that working with industry partners. I wrote down, I think, following the previous panel, partnership. You can't do it by yourself. You just can't. And for us, a lot of that partnership has been driven by market evidence. So we've gone out there and said, okay, industry, what can you do? And we've allowed that partnership to help shape everything that we do. So all of those interventions that you see that I highlighted, all of that has been driven by market evidence. What role do social ventures play? Because they do. There are a lot of them delivering really excellent population, community-based services within their localities that is transforming people's lives. But they're not going to come through the traditional funding routes that we often run within Innovate UK, which I'm part of. So how do we encourage those people, and what instrument do we use? Because they don't have the funds to do match funding with us. So I'm going to have to think about things like SBRI, which offers them 100% funding, as opposed to maybe a larger company where I think actually we should be going into this 50-50 because you get a benefit and I get a benefit. So I think is trying to find out and using the research evidence to help inform everything you do at different stages. And I should mention one last point, that your point around the behavioral, cultural is so important. I have lots of colleagues in the room who would agree with me that we feel like the whole aging has been medicalized, and it's really frustrating. So when you talk about sort of solutions for the aging market, it's grey, it's boring, it's miserable. I don't want to have it. I don't want to have it in my house, and I don't want to use it. So how do we inform what we do with the voices of all the people themselves and co-produce and really help drive that? And how do we use social, behavioral, and design research right at the very beginning to help inform everything that we do? And I'll stop there.
So just before, Kellie, you come in, so a couple of observations to draw out from what you said, Cynthia, that speak to some points we heard the first thing this morning around the lack of participation of very small firms in innovation activity, and the question of, when are we big enough to be able to play the innovation game? And what you're saying is stressing the importance of tailoring the opportunity and the ways in which different types of actor can get engaged in solving problems. I think that's an important point that builds on Elvira's observation around the mix of policies and tailoring those to different actors that you want to be participating. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think, Rick, public procurement has got a big role to play there because it's a key lever, isn't it? We always say in Cardiff Capital Region, public balance sheets worth about 3 billion. Leveraging that, I think, is a critical challenge in itself. But I guess, the answer is in that statement, isn't it? Movements with missions make markets. So all the things that we're talking about in terms of societal challenges, whether it's, ageing, food security, energy security, friend here from Transport for Wales, introducing the South East Wales Metro, future mobility. These are all, there's huge commercial opportunities here. This is the opportunity to pinpoint the private sector to where those big future growth trends are going to be. And if we invest in public investment in innovation, we'll crowd in the private investment. And if I can just use that Aberthaw power station as an example, we've acquired that because we don't have domestic energy capability in Cardiff Capital Region, But we're doing that on a commercial case. We're not there to chuck loads of grant money in it and say to everyone, have a share of this. It's got to wash its face. It's got to be done on clear commercial terms. So the economic and the business benefits and the societal ones should be two sides of the same coin, really.
And I guess that's really the part. We'd heard, I think, some important observations around patience and spending time to frame the opportunity and work with. I think Cathy mentioned this in particular in her overview of the different ways challenge approaches can be impactful. So that questioning the sort of short-termism and the urgency, eagerness to get going with a patience that allows us to build the foundations from which to be successful in a more transformative way is an interesting point to hear. I've got a question here, and then a question there. We'll have those three first. There's a mic there. So if we take the two that were quite close there, and then I'll put this off to Ian after that.
Caitlin Davis from Welsh Government. I'd like to ask about co-production and how the user or the citizen can have a central and meaningful role within challenge-led innovation and a mission-orientated approach. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about how we did it. You're absolutely right. Initially, there was an emphasis on all of the different challenge models to have a lay panelist. That was going to be the route. And actually, our challenge directors sought to understand, and working with our advisory group, the message that was coming through was, don't do this piecemeal. If you really want this to work, you have to demonstrate to people that you value their time and their efforts and that they are making a meaningful contribution to your decision making at every level. So for us, we had older people in our interview panels, interviewing innovators and really challenging their idea of what they think works for an older person. And that was pretty eye-opening, because I guess up until that point, there's been a feeling that you get, an industry person or a university, an academic, or people like myself to sit on those panels and interview the innovator. But we felt that there was a role there for an older person to give that perspective. I'm the person who's going to use this. How do I see this working within the context? And the other thing we tried to do is ensure that we had a diverse mix of older people, so you didn't just get one view of what an older person likes. We know clearly with everyone in this room, we're all different, we all like different things, and we all see our aging journey quite differently. So for us, that's how we did it. And then we employed our innovators that we funded to demonstrate how they were going to co-produce their projects with older people. In one of the projects, one of the competitions that we ran was called Designed for Aging, and we sought to introduce a stage gate process. So we required the innovators to initially do a kind of co-production, user-centered design, sort of 6-month kind of feasibility study, and then subsequent to that we brought them back in, interviewed them to understand how that information has helped shape their business plan, helped shape the solution, and depending on their demonstration of the value of engaging with the potential users of those solutions, we were able to give them further funding to go on and develop further what they needed to. So that's how we've done it.
Yeah, that sounds like a really iterative process. And I don't think we're that far down the line yet. And I think, I probably don't know the answer to this question because I don't think we've got to that stage compellingly enough yet. I think, the whole co-production thing is a vexed area, isn't it? I think, again, if I was going to sort of critique the approach we've taken on our challenge fund, it is very public sector focused, and the private sector are almost expected to be first responders. And it can tend to be transactional if you haven't figured out the wider business model, the sort of theory of change that you're really looking to work towards. So I think my problem with this is that the whole innovation process, I think, around co-production and collaboration is geared up towards outdated theories of technology transfer. You know, I still think that's where we are in the UK. So yeah, I think we've got to try and disrupt that. How do we do it? Rick, you've got some really good ideas around the innovation commons, but I'll let you come in on that in a few minutes' time. We've talked about building in some upfront discovery phases. But again, I think, you know, our programme is still being held to account by quite traditional measures, which is something we're grappling with at the moment. You know, value for money, you know, cost-benefit analysis. What does that mean in a challenge setting? It's very difficult, and I think where we are at the moment is trying to push and to get beyond some of these and make sure that we put, you know, different things in place, so we're being held to account by things that feel right and meaningful for what we're trying to do, and not right and meaningful because they've been set up for a very different system, really. So no easy answers there, Rick.
Thank you. Oishi and Ian, why don't you both ask your questions and then the panellists can respond. I just want to try and make sure we get time to have a few more questions. So Oishi first, then Ian, but we'll take the two, and then I've got another question at the back and another question over there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm Oishi. I am a researcher on the Infuse program, and my question is about institutions and identities. So Cynthia, you mentioned how, you know, Secretary of State changes and that creates some issues, and this thing about, you know, you mentioned Cardiff Capital Region and CCR, but when we are working with, say, the UK government, Welsh government, and the local authorities, it's really hard to forge a new institution or forge a new identity as CCR in ways of working. So what are your thoughts around, like, approaching this challenge in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
just want to say, Rick, I think we just got to carry on, because there will always be change at the macro level, yeah? Macroeconomic change, geopolitics. You know, we've come to expect that, haven't we? You know, that is the one constant, I think. And I guess from our perspective, you know, it is difficult, you know, having to work with 2 layers of government. Sometimes they don't always agree, 10 local authorities. But it's those 10 local authorities that give us that stability. They're here for the long term. And I think we've just got to get more into the habit of this game of regional public investment. Yes, we've got to look both ways, UK government, Welsh government. But actually, I think there's a lot more we can start to do at the Cardiff Capital Region level. You know, distillation of Welsh Government's National Innovation Strategy, setting up our own evergreen funds, trying to be much more self-sufficient, having our own tier of governance. You know, thinking about how things are much more driven by evidence about what we need to affect in our region, rather than just some of the, you know, the global programs that we get presented with. And I think through things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, some of the levelling up funds, we're starting to take a much more mature regional approach to how these things are done. And I think, you know, devolution, it has more than one shape or form, if I can say that very diplomatically.
We will have the chance to return to some of these points later. So I think there are some important points there that speak to some of Elvira's presentation this morning, and also work that Elvira, David, Catherine and colleagues are doing, looking at Glasgow, Manchester and Cardiff in comparison. Each has different governance arrangements, but each reports complexity and certain, let's say, challenges around operating within those multi-level governance arrangements. But I think each is also looking at how it can evolve and develop its own institutions to begin to create that space that can offer some continuity and stability within the region, to allow us to show the patience and longer termism that we've touched on. But that's very much emergent. Ian.
Hi, this is Ian Brotherton from Innovate UK. This question is very much for Kellie, I'm afraid, Cynthia, not yourself. So, so you actually mentioned the metro system and you mentioned the power station, and you also mentioned your challenge funds. Now, one of the questions I have is, how are you going to bring those together? So some of our most successful bits of challenge work actually have been in the transport system. HS2, Network Rail, Highways England have done some amazing SBIs that have actually got into their systems. So as the metro develops, which is a big infrastructure programme, a lot of money behind it, how are you going to bring in the challenge programmes or your investment, for example, in the compound semiconductor cluster? I think I see that those big infrastructure programmes are increasingly seen as the routes to actually the public sector stimulating innovation.
Yeah, I think, you know, the the way that we can do that, and I've been speaking to Rick about this recently, is we've tended to do things, I think, in quite isolated ways. So if we redevelop that power station, comprehensively redeveloped it, in and alongside the South East Wales Metro, what may not happen at Cardiff Airport, it would probably get some good outcomes, but they'd be single project interventions again. And I think that where we're looking to take CCR missions is to have that overview of more open innovation. Years ago in Wales, you probably remember it, there was a Co-Innovate programme that worked across, you were probably involved actually, that worked across industrial sectors, but bringing in, big infrastructure developments to try and, establish those connections and alignments. So I don't think this is easy territory by any means, but I think if we've got a concrete focus on, some of the key challenges and problems we're trying to solve, and I think if we've got the infrastructure, I think if we've got the governance, if we've got the capacity, the capability to want to take some of this forward. I'm not saying we've got the answers, but I think we're a step closer to doing it than not doing it, if that makes sense. So we've got some ideas, and I think we could take the easy path of saying, let's just open an R&D facility at Aberthaw and see if things magically happen, see if things will collide and serendipity will take place. But I think because we've got to have quite a commercial focus, we've got to rely on more than chance. We've got to put, and this is where I think the private sector will have a huge role to play. The reason we acquired that power station as the public sector was, and it was a competitive closed bidding process, was we felt we could be a patient, long-term investor and a custodian of the site. So I think what we've brought here is the opportunity to work away and try and do some of those things. What I'm clear about is we're not going to be able to do it without the private sector. We don't have the skills, competency, investment of the private sector. We don't have, the intellect of the research base. We haven't got the links on the ground that some civic society organisations. So I guess, we've got to try harder to work at, these open innovation programmes that I think give us a better chance of those things coming together in orchestrated, well-executed ways. So, yeah, some things are in development, commercially sensitive for now, but hopefully for not for too much longer. But, yeah, I think we've certainly got the intent to have a good go at this stuff.
Thanks, Kellie. We'll take. I think we've got three more questions. That would be a fourth question, because there was one over here. Okay, 4 questions, but if you can ask them, and then we'll invite the panellists to comment.
Okay, so there's a couple of comments that I wish to make, Kellie. One of the things, and I'm just going to put it out there, this building is not accessible. It's not accessible by public transport. It's not accessible if you're disabled. And if we want to include everybody, I think sometimes we need to be outside of Cardiff.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose that goes on to my next point. You keep talking about connections and SMEs. Actually, if I was an SME outside of Cardiff, I wouldn't even look to the Cardiff City regional deal, because all I consider it to do is look after Cardiff. I know it doesn't. However, I'm not the general public out there, and if I'm looking in, Cardiff City regional deal means it's for Cardiff only. So as an SME out there, I wouldn't even consider that. I think the other thing is, we already had a question about co-production. I'd ask what co-production CCRD does. We're supposed to be delivering for those with lived experience out there. We've got the Social Wellbeing and Future Generations Act all out there. It gives us all direction, and I don't think we follow it as a CCRD. And if we want to involve everybody in these decisions that we're making, we need to include those with lived experience. That's the other thing. So, and it's all about our well-being. That's what it's supposed to be about. But you can't get here on public transport. So you've got 10 regional local authorities, and unless you live in Cardiff, you can't get here on transport. So I think that's something else we need to consider. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I mean, many of us do come on public transport. We get the train, but I accept what you're saying. It's not accessible for everybody. But then, this isn't our only base. We've got locations across the region. Many of us work from our local high streets. We're trying to be embedded in our local places. And I think when you've got something that's called Cardiff Capital Region, there's always going to be a certain perception about Cardiff being Cardiff-centric. I speak to other combined authorities and city regions, and I think that's a common pattern across the piece. But hopefully when you look at the evidence and the things that we've invested in, hopefully that tells a different story in relation to even projects that we're looking at in Bridgend, the Valley Seed Fund initiative. The first investments that we've made through some of those funds that I've spoken about have been in the Northern Valleys. So, I think we're really aware of this need for distributed impact. I guess the civil society bit is harder when you're a city deal, when you're a single funding programme entity that will mainly deal with businesses. And I think, Jane, that's exactly why we've set up the approach that we have around challenge-driven innovation, so we can access some of those more, the thorny and more complex societal issues. And believe me, it was really difficult getting a decision on this, because it's not the standard stuff that city and growth deals do. It's a really awkward fit. But I think we've got to keep pushing to make space for this in future programmes. So yeah, I accept that everything we do isn't perfect. We have to start from where we're at. But I believe we're making progress. I believe we're delivering a big impact. And I think some of the new things that we're continually pushing for, buying a power station to drive domestic capability in a region, I'm not seeing that everywhere, I guess.
Okay, we're going to take two last questions. Or three last questions, but can we ask the questions before the panellists respond, and then you will have your sort of final opportunity to comment, and then it's lunchtime. So why don't we start at the back, and then Pete, and then Gary.
Question for both panellists. Different question. In Cardiff, I was having a conversation about the Prosperity Fund up in North Wales, about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the kind of stat that there's going to be about 60% of everybody who's in employment now may not be in employment in about 15 years' time because of the job change environment. So have you got inbuilt mechanisms to make sure that the innovators are job creators rather than being just innovative for the sake of, if you don't mind me saying it? And secondly, just around the aging programme. I'm really interested. I'm going to be talking this afternoon about why good food makes a massive difference to communities and makes a massive difference to people's lives. I'm interested, have you funded any major programmes that deal specifically with feeding older people very good fresh food?
Great, thank you. We'll take the questions if that's okay. Pete?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Peter Davis, Monmouthshire County Council. I guess I'm just going to take the opportunity while Cynthia's with us. I can pick off conversations and questions with Kellie separately. But Cynthia. So my role, I guess I'm Deputy Chief Executive. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Monmouthshire Council. Why that's relevant and important is because we've just delivered a budget for 23-24. It's been an absolute killer. It's the same for all Welsh local authorities and probably across the UK. Social care is absolutely killing us in terms of demand, complexity, and the spend that's an overspend that's putting on our budgets. The health and the social care system is in, crisis. Depends what category of crisis you want to give that, but that makes that institutional capability that was talked about in the first session really difficult to pull out. And I guess a degree of critique with social care in the sense that they are proud people, they are fantastic public servants, they like to operate within their own networks often, and it's just I'm just interested in your perspective really, because innovation and change in social care can be often quite slow. I need it to be a hell of a lot quicker if I'm going to keep the council solvent going forward. So I'm just really interested in your perspective and to understand actually for those, I think it was 80 challenges that you've got coming forward at the minute, how many of those are in health and how many are in actually coming from local government and social care?
Thanks, Pete. Gary?
Gary Walpole, Circular Economy, Innovation Communities, Cardiff Met and Swansea. My question relates to that, and it's based on a couple of points made this morning around absorptive capacity and developing absorptive capacity, particularly within local authorities, public services. what's being done on the healthy ageing to help develop that? Because I think that's a value creation story that needs to be shared. And then secondly to Kellie, what is planned in terms of developing absorptive capacity in the region?
Okay, thanks very much. Cynthia, would you like to lead off in
Yeah.
responding to those and any final points you'd like to make?
No,
please?
will do. You're absolutely right with regards to the state of social care. I won't lie. I think every one of us can just step out the front door and it kind of hits you in the face. It's largely why we have chosen to support innovation that is not reliant on the kind of formal healthcare risk sharing sort of reimbursement measures, because we recognise how difficult it is. I think lots of people talked about implementation challenges. Wow, I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that, to be quite frank. Oh, this is being recorded, never mind. So you're right, which is why we've sought to kind of approach the problem slightly differently. So we've kind of looked at the idea of aging as a life course, and the idea that if you give people the right tools now themselves, not necessarily related to whatever else is happening within the kind of social care system, that they can actually make some changes now in terms of their physical activity, their sort of social networks and connections, and in terms of health at work, and how they can engage with living well with cognitive impairment that allows them to just get on and live their lives, not necessarily dependent on whatever else is happening in that space. So you're absolutely right. We haven't funded anything specifically around food, and that is primarily because we have an agriculture and food challenge who are doing that. We did have a number of projects come through around food reformulation and preparation that looked at the sorts of things that you're talking about in terms of fresh food to other people. But we were really driven by the need to ensure that we were addressing the inequalities issue. So it couldn't be a product that only a certain few can afford and therefore benefit from. So for us, everything we do is driven by who will benefit from this. Is it the broadest population, or is it just a minority few? Sorry, I didn't catch your question.
Absorptive capacity.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is just my personal view. I think you've got to be a little bit honest with yourself and accept where you are at the moment in terms of the absorptive capacity within the institutions that we're working with. There's not much point. So let me caveat that. It's that balance between incremental innovation and disruptive innovation. But you have to do both, but you have to do both keeping an eye on the absorptive capacity of the institutions that you know these things are going to be delivered within. Because otherwise you get a bunch of people who are really keen to innovate, driven by self-experience, lived experience that someone talked about, and they're not able to see so much those fantastic solutions being used by the people who need it most. And it's depressing for them, and it's depressing for us as funders. So there is a balancing act that needs to happen, and it is one that we don't always get correctly, but we keep trying, because you kind of have to. We know that innovation is the only way we can get through.
Thank you very much. Kellie, last word to you before lunch.
Just going to comment on the point made about the innovators, the job creators, and the 10 leaders of the Cardiff Capital Region are absolutely focused on the importance of innovation to the region's growth, productivity and prosperity. That is an absolute key line of sight, and we're really lucky that they set that context. So for us, I think if you looked at productivity in the Cardiff Capital Region and GVA, it's really at the moment characterised by a high employment rate. And that means that our GVA per head of population is much less about the quality of jobs. It's the numbers game, and that's something that we've got to change. So can the innovators become job creators? with the right ecosystem conditions in place, which is why I make the points about, sticking to the plan around things like, patient capital, access to good premises, access to good support for skills programs, making sure that we've got local government innovation around our challenge fund. It's all of those conditions over time which I think can help unlock, some of the potential that we have in early innovation, creating the system up through which they can grow and progress. This stuff takes time. And, and one of the things, very often you expect that, be cutting ribbons and, wow, this is new, this is what you've invested in. Some of these deep-seated structural and systemic changes are going to take a long time because we've got a big job of work. Have we funded projects around food resilience? Yes. There's a project at the moment that's underway across a number of local authority areas. It's not particularly focused on older people at the moment. It's just about local food growth and security and resilience, but I guess that will develop as it goes along.
Thanks, Kel. Just a final observation, again, building from what Elvira said this morning. If we want innovation to help create jobs, it's vital that we take this more capacious view of what innovation is. So it isn't just tech-led big business partnering with university departments in innovation districts. It's foundational economy. It's working much closer to where a lot of people actually are working already. So that, building again from the observations from this morning, the foundational economy and innovating in the foundational economy, what we're starting to think about as mundane innovation, is really, I think, crucial to questions around, for example, employment prospects for people whose current jobs may well disappear. Anyway, it's lunchtime. Thanks ever so much to our panellists.